The recent past of apartheid in South Africa is still fresh in the minds of those who lived it, our parents and grandparents. Dr. Nokuthula Mazibuko Msimang, a University of Pretoria fellow, has a new historical picture book for children called Soweto Tea Party. Now, the majority of the stories focus on how adults have struggled for freedom and equality, with some even dying in the process. As a child of a freedom fighter herself, Dr. Mazibuko Msimang shares her childhood through the narration. And she joins us now in studio to tell us more about the picture book. Dr. Msimang, thank you so much for joining us today. Just talk to us about the book, Soweto Tea Party. I know that it was an ode to your parents, as mentioned earlier, but talk to us about why it was so important for you to put together a picture book specifically.
Good morning, and thank you for having me. And as you've rightly put that, it's a picture book based on the history of our country. But I needed to tell it in a way that really celebrates our icons, you know. It is partly autobiographical because the story is around a father who's under house arrest, which my father was in the 70s and 80s. But how does that father ensure that, you know, the child still has a childhood and a magical childhood, you know? So when my publisher, Dushanka Stochakovic, said to me, look, why don't you, you know, write about it? Why don't you write a story about it? Because I was concerned about passing on the history to my own children, but in a way that does not, you know, make them feel sad. So I thought, look, you know, my father used to tell us stories of freedom to give us mental strength and play African music, you know, so that you forget the war, you know, the war outside. So I thought, you know, it would be interesting to have the book revolve around a tea party. And who comes to the tea party? I'll tell you, one guest is, of course, our beloved Nelson Rolihlahla Mandela. But to find out who the other guests are, you'll have to buy the book.
Oh, I love it. So all these famous people come to the tea party.
They come to the tea party in Soweto.
Oh, yes. Fantastic. You know, it's so interesting what you mentioned there, that it was so important to your father not only to teach his children about what was happening outside the home, the war that was happening outside in the streets of South Africa, freedom fighters and the like fighting for this country's liberation. The war at home as well, there's something to be said about that, about in the coalface of everything that was happening, instilling in children at the time ideas and ideals. Because essentially he understood that this future that he was fighting for would be carried out by people like yourselves, and so that being important to what was happening inside the home, not only what was happening outside in the streets as well. Yeah.
You know, I always remember that he would say that, I mean, you know, then it was really about dismantling a system. But now in the future you have to rebuild and ensure, you know, economic strength. So we had to be prepared, you know, for that transition, to say how do we then build a life that is peaceful, a life that's prosperous. And I remember Ubaba used to say, Guti, that will probably be harder than just pulling apart a system, you know. But for me, it was really about how does then one, you know, understand the history so that one can be centered. And how do you remain, you know, resilient, just spiritually, mentally, physically, you know. And it's really something that you pass on from generation to generation. And even now, I mean, young people have a lot of challenges, you know. Us as parents raising our children, how do we ensure that we pass on that resilience to say, look, you know, we need to continue to build our continent, you know, and what is your role in it? And I find that, you know, history grounds you. You know, it gives you focus and it clears the lens to say, look, this is how far we've come. This is what was achieved, you know, but this is what we need to do. We need to figure out the economics, you know. And I'm glad, you know, to know that a lot of young people take education seriously. You know, there are a lot of, I was watching, you know, the Newzroom Afrika actually broadcast on June 16, and you interviewed, you know, young professionals, you know, children, you know, who grew up in rural areas and they become lawyers, you know, they become teachers and they become, you know, really, really very useful members of our society. So that's heartening, you know, to say, look, you know, the kids understand the assignment, as they put it.
Of course.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the autobiographical nature, rather, of the book itself. I mean, your father, Fanyana Mazibuko, was in fact placed under house arrest, and this story is talking about that time in your life. Why was it, how were you able to draw inspiration from that, essentially, to write this book? I mean, what was it about that period that stood out to you as a child to say that this is something that I absolutely need to share with the world, and more importantly, need to share with little ones in helping them sort of piece together South Africa's historical context?
Yeah. So, well, as you've stated, that my father, Fanyana Mazibuko, was a teacher at Morris Isaacson High School. So it was one of the places where really the 1976 revolution started, you know. So for all of my life, I've had, you know, a front row seat to all of that unfolding, you know, and of course, you know, was privy to what was going on. So for me, it was really about how do we then use that knowledge and not become pessimistic, you know, about it. But also, you know, keeping a record is important, you know, to keep a record and say, look, this is what happened, and it shouldn't happen again. You know, I mean, it was really, really painful what happened in 1976, you know, the killing of children, you know, defenseless children, innocent children, you know. But as I said, that to make future generations understand what happened, but in a way that does not, you know, just depress them and make them immobile. You know, to say, look, we need to pay respect to, you know, everybody who gave up their lives, gave up their childhood for the freedom that, you know, we are enjoying now. Freedom wasn't free, you know, but also for us to understand, which, you know, look, what's the lay of the land? You know, what are the challenges, you know, and how do you then tackle this mission impossible that we still have of ensuring that young people are educated, ensuring that, you know, our health system works, ensuring that we have proper housing, you know, and in whatever sphere you are, how do you then, you know, I am in the literary sphere, you know, we need to ensure that our children are reading, we need to ensure that there is availability of books in 11 official languages, of which I'm proud that Soweto Tea Party is available in 11 official languages, you know. So in whatever sphere you are, you know, what are you doing to ensure that the world is a better place?
I get the sense that a lot of the book also has to do with this idea of passing on the baton to the next generation, and I wonder just if I could just, you know, sort of pique your brain a little bit on whether or not you feel as though enough is being done to adequately equip the younger generation for the challenges and the projects and the programs that are still to come in terms of, you know, piecing this country back together again. I mean, you obviously work in the literary space. I mean, we were all shocked when we learned that about 75% of grade 4 learners read without any comprehension. And so when you're in that space and you're wanting to make a difference, how do you go about doing that and true to what your book is trying to do, truly pass that baton on to the next generation?
Yeah. You know, Ntokozo, for my part, yes, I am a writer, and obviously I'm in the public sphere, you know. But I often say to parents especially that, you know what, try to influence and impact what you can, you know, and you have influence in your home, you know. So what strategies do you have in your home to ensure that, you know, your children are mentally strengthened through, you know, access to content that will really make them understand who they are, affirm who they are, and just keep them inspired, you know. So that you can control. You know, yes, we can lobby and, you know, in terms of our schools, because we are in partnership with the schools, you know, in partnership with corporate and government and so on, you know. But I tend to focus more energy and more attention in areas that I know that I have a measure of control.
Of course.
over. So, logo kunye,
Yeah, no, absolutely. Let's go back to Soweto Tea Party, though.
Yes.
You mentioned one of the famous guests that come to the tea party.
Yes, yes.
I won't let you reveal the other names because
No,
I think
won't.
the readers need to discover that for themselves. But at least tell us what went into picking the guests. You know, I'd imagine these are individuals who are influential, who make significant contributions to this country and are likely to leave some sort of lasting impression on the reader.
Yeah. You know, I have to tell you that the first draft of the book had...
There were drafts.
There were drafts. There were drafts. There are always drafts.
Yes.
There were many more guests in the first draft. And I think my publisher and my editor, you know, Nicola looked, read through it, and they were like, Knox, we are going to have to edit.
Cut down.
It's a children's picture book. You know, it is not an encyclopedia, So sadly, the work of culling had to happen, And I usually take a step away from that process because it is painful, because obviously you pick people that you really, really want, your children to know about. But I made peace with that process because I do readings. In fact, we had a dual launch, so in Melville and in Soweto. So in Soweto, it was at an ECD center, and there were children, So whenever I read to the children, then I kind of mention the other guests, and describe who they are and what have you. And the children are delightful. They're delightful, yeah. So I'm, in performance, I then tell a fuller story, because there were, Nelson Rolihlahla Mandela, as we all know, was really part of, a large group of people who fought for freedom. And even beyond the icons, many South Africans were part of just the groundswell of people who brought about change in various ways. I mean, the struggle had many pillars, So when we engage with young people to make them understand, which, this is what it took to get us here. We cannot afford to backtrack. So you're part of the world, you're part of the community, you need to take it forward, So when you are in schools, when you are in ECD centers, you obviously tailor it to the audience that you're talking to. You then ensure that children, then understand that they are part of the process and they need to take it, forward.
Well, it sounds lovely. And where can people find copies of this book?
You can find copies at Book Circle Capital in Melville, as well as ethnickids.africa. As well as newafricabooks.com. And I know some exclusive books also have copies. But go to your nearest bookstore, because demand also, allows the bookstore owners to order. Yeah. But Book Circle Capital in Melville is really your best bet. And they do deliver also around the country.
Well, there we have it, Soweto Tea Party. Dr. Msimang, thank you so much for joining us on Newzroom Afrika, for sharing this delightful picture book with us, Soweto Tea Party. That's Dr. Nokuthula Mazibuko Msimang, a University of Pretoria research fellow and author.